Imagine if the government kicked down your door, arrested you without charging you with a crime, and then paraded you in front of cameras while a crowd jeered at you, calling you a dangerous communist. Your life would be ruined. Well, that happened to a lot of people during the Red Scare. And it's not that long ago. This is our Cold War series. Every weekday in February, we're releasing a new episode about one aspect of the Cold War. Today, we're talking about the Red Scare. Specifically, we're going to talk about what caused the Red Scare, who it affected, and how it changed American politics. Now, this isn't the first time we've talked about the Red Scare on this channel. In fact, there are two Red Scares in American history. The first happened after World War I, when Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer raided suspected anarchist and socialist meeting halls and homes. You can learn more about that through additional resources. Today, we're focusing on the second Red Scare, which happened during the early Cold War. After World War II, Americans worried that communists had infiltrated the federal government. They also feared the growing influence of labor unions. To some Americans, the actions of the Soviet Union after World War II were proof that communism was sinister and scary. The Soviets had installed communist governments in Eastern Europe. They had developed an atomic bomb, and they had expanded their influence into China. To many Americans, this looked like part of a grand plan to take over the world. There were already plenty of anti-communist organizations in the US, like the American Legion and the Daughters of the American Revolution. But after the war, Congress created special organizations to root out communists. For example, in 1947, they created the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or FBI for short. No, wait, that one already existed. The one they created was the House Committee on Un-American Activities, or HCUA for short. Again, no, wait, that one also already existed. But anyway, in 1947, this committee started to investigate suspected communists and communist sympathizers. Now, to be clear, the HUAC didn't charge these people with crimes. These people weren't necessarily doing anything illegal. Instead, the HUAC was trying to find people who had either joined the Communist Party or aided and abetted the Communist Party. The problem was there was a big difference between suspicion and proof. For example, in 1947, the HUAC questioned several Hollywood screenwriters. They wanted to know if any of them had ever belonged to the Communist Party. One of those screenwriters was a guy named Ring Lardner Jr. Now, Lardner hadn't joined the Communist Party. He just knew a couple of communists. That was enough for the HUAC. They added his name to a blacklist, meaning that no one in the film industry could hire him. Suddenly, Lardner was unemployed. Over the next few years, the HUAC investigated other industries too. They investigated the State Department, the National War Labor Board, and the United Auto Workers Union, to name just a few. They also held public hearings about suspected communists. At these hearings, people would be accused of disloyalty, but they wouldn't necessarily know why or have a chance to defend themselves. Later, we'll talk about how this changed, but for now, just understand that these public hearings helped build up a culture of fear. People became afraid to speak out, or even to think certain things because they might be labeled a communist. This climate of fear is called McCarthyism, named after Wisconsin Senator Joseph McCarthy. In 1950, McCarthy announced that he had a list of 205 confirmed members of the Communist Party working in the State Department. He probably didn't have a list. McCarthy never actually published the list. Instead, he used the threat of communism to launch a personal crusade against suspected communists. McCarthy held televised hearings to expose these people. People from all over the country would be brought before the committee where they'd be interrogated and publicly humiliated. If you made a mistake, you might say you were sorry, and the committee might let you go. But if you said you were innocent, McCarthy would call you a communist sympathizer. Then they'd ask you if you still believed in freedom of speech. See, the idea was that you couldn't be a good American and a communist sympathizer at the same time. Most people understood that they could get in deep trouble with McCarthy, so instead of defending themselves, they just kept quiet. One person who got caught in the crosshairs of McCarthyism was a man named Algis Uzalaitis. In 1954, the House Committee on Un-American Activities summoned Uzalis to testify against suspected communists. Uzalis was a Lithuanian immigrant and an American citizen. He'd fought in the Spanish Civil War on the Republican side. and worked for the Office of Strategic Services during World War II. But none of that was any of McCarthy's business. All McCarthy knew was that Uzalitis had once been a member of the Communist Party. When Uzalitis refused to answer questions about his past membership, the HUAC put him in contempt. Soon he was arrested and sent to prison for refusing to cooperate. As time went on, McCarthyism got more and more extreme. People were arrested based on the flimsiest of evidence. It wasn't enough to simply be accused of something. It wasn't even enough to be found guilty of something. You could be accused and convicted of nothing at all. Just imagine if someone said you looked suspicious and then you were sent to jail without a trial. That's what happened to a lot of people during the Red Scare. It wasn't just regular people who got hurt either. Many members of President Truman's administration lost their jobs due to McCarthyism. Some were fired, others resigned. But it wasn't until 1953 that President Eisenhower took action. Eisenhower thought that McCarthy was getting out of control, so he ordered the director of the FBI to keep secret the fact that his brother was a suspected communist. After all, it wasn't really any of McCarthy's business. But McCarthy found out anyway. He publicly accused the president of being soft on communism. Now that's pretty bad. You don't want to accuse the president of being soft on communism. So sure enough, Eisenhower worked with Congress to censure, that is, officially reprimand McCarthy for his behavior. McCarthy spent the rest of his career trying to rebuild his reputation, but it was too late. He died a broken man in 1957. So the Red Scare didn't last forever, thank goodness. But the harm that it did to the reputations and careers of many people lasted a lot longer. So why did the Red Scare end? Well, partially because McCarthy got censured, but also because many people thought he'd gone too far. As he got more and more extreme, people began to question his methods and motivations. Some people even thought he was having mental problems. The New York Times stopped publishing his speeches because they were becoming too absurd. By the mid-1950s, most people were ready to move on from the Red Scare. McCarthyism was no longer useful as a way to attack political opponents, so it faded away. I think that's a lesson we can apply to our own lives. Sometimes it's easy to fall into the mindset of the Red Scare. We become so convinced that the other side must be stopped at all costs that we start accusing innocent people of wrongdoing. We might make unfair generalizations or stop listening to opposing viewpoints altogether. And in doing so, we forget what it means to be an American. What was that like during the Red Scare? Well, Americans took pride in being open-minded and tolerant. That's why millions of immigrants came to the United States during the first Red Scare and the second Red Scare. During the second Red Scare, 80% of the people the HUAC investigated were immigrants or the children of immigrants. Despite what you might think, most people didn't support McCarthyism. Many people saw it as un-American, but unfortunately, McCarthyism won out in the end. Innocent people lost their jobs, families were torn apart, lives were ruined. But you know what else was ruined? The reputation of the United States. Our allies saw how we persecuted innocent people and wondered if they could trust us. Today, we look back on McCarthyism and wonder how it ever happened. How could a whole nation succumb to such senseless fear? But we can learn from that. We can remember that it was only possible because ordinary people turned away from tolerance and open-mindedness. But if we remain vigilant, we can prevent it from happening again. This has been Crash Course US History, a series made with the help of a tech company. You want to help keep Crash Course free for everyone forever? You can join our community on a crowdfunding platform.